Okay, now we are there. The third is the shout.
There you go. Yeah, I'm so sorry. Wow,
no worries.
You know.
No worries. It's okay. Now it's okay. Problem sorted out.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. As I'm going to introduce you to those people who don't know you. I have to say that we had a previous interview on Music Without Quarantine, and we were speaking briefly about your career.
Mm-hmm.
And for this virtual coffee, that I've got my coffee here, by the way. This is my coffee.
I have my coffee.
Yeah. I'd like to concentrate more on your discography, but also to deal with your previous experience as a singer with different ensembles. Nowadays, you run the ensemble Phoenix Music Ensemble, and but previously you've sung for several ensembles in the United States and also in Europe, and this is what I would like to deal with. Before we go back in time and we get back to the United States, I'd like that our starting point would be the Requiem for a Pink Moon.
Okay, sure.
And particularly, I'm interested in a person, which is Nick Drake. For those of people who are watching us and don't know who Nick Drake is, could you tell us about him and why? What's the relationship between Nick Drake and Requiem for a Moon Pink Moon? Sorry.
Pink Moon, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Nick Drake was a singer-songwriter. Died in 1974. He was only 26 years old when he died, and it was slightly mysterious circumstances. Well, not a mystery really, but he died at his own home, probably of a drug overdose, unfortunately, of antidepressants. He was not happy with how his musical career had gone. Perhaps he had some depression. Who knows? Maybe because of drug use or something. But he did manage at the very young age of 26 already to bring out 3 recordings, 3 LPs at that time with Island Records, and named Joel Boyd, who was the producer and stood behind him. And Nick was English, grew up in a town called Tamworth on Arden, place I've actually visited his little town and the gravestone. I also met his sister at one point, which was really nice, Gabriella Drake. She lives near Wales in a place called Shrewsbury, or outside of Shrewsbury. And we performed there once, Requiem for a Pink Moon, and she came, which was a huge event. I mean, her being there at the concert, his only surviving, sibling. It was his only sibling, but his only surviving family member, really, family member. And that was incredible. But Nick wrote, as I say, wrote a lot of songs, and he brought out 3 recordings. And the last one was the last recording was called Pink Moon. And so I had the idea, knowing Nick's music since already the 80s, I had the idea at some point to put together English singer-songwriters, let's say, which I kind of regarded them as. When I met the English lutenist songwriters named like John Dowland and Thomas Campion and those guys, who were composing around 1600 in England, I was writing my own songs, was kind of, singer-songwriter guy too, and so when I heard, though, Campion, when I heard Dowland, when I heard these songs, I thought, oh my God, that's a really, really, really high level. And I got involved then in this, the golden age of Elizabethan lute song anyway, right around, as I say, 1600, the end of the Renaissance, sort of the beginning into the beginning of what we would call the Baroque. But Nick, anyway, putting Nick's songs together with the English lutenist songwriters was my dream and my project, and so I did it.
Yeah, and let me read part of the dedication of your CD. It says, "This CD is for Nick. Thank you for the inspiration, Joel." And then, "Requiem aeternam dona eis Domini et lux perpetua luceat eis." So I think that says everything.
That everlasting light shine upon you. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, I had a lot of. It was a big process actually making the CD. Actually, what happened was there was an event that made me think about Nick in a very concrete way. Let's say again after a long pause from doing his music, at least, I wasn't. When I got a guitar in my hands, I would sometimes play a couple of Nick Drake songs that I knew. But otherwise, I was a lutenist and singer and wasn't playing that music anymore. But I went to a theater one night, and the movie theater, and there was a Volkswagen ad, and right away I recognized the music. I thought, oh, it's Pink Moon. And the ad was really, I must say, really tastefully done. And there was this Volkswagen Beetle that drove out, and there was a moon, of course, and the pink moon refers to something like the moon eclipse, and it has a little bit of actually an ominous meaning for Nick. He says, the pink moon, when it comes, the eclipse is going to get you all. It's going to, yeah. And so anyway, the ad came on, and I looked around in the theater. I felt it, that people really were into it, and they liked the music a lot. They really responded to it. And I thought, wow, his music still has a lot of power right now. And it kind of got the idea going. And then about 7 years later, I think it was quite a while later, I actually finally took the time. I went to Italy, to a place called the Art Monastery, which doesn't exist anymore. But these guys were really interesting people there, Americans, actually trying to find some Italians to give them a monastery, basically, where they could make art and do their own thing. And so I was there just a couple of weeks, but with a view of the Umbrian Hills, and I was the artist in residence, and which was a big title, but it was a small place, an intimate place. But there were some people there, a guy named Christopher Fulling and some other people that really gave me some input and some interesting ideas. And I just worked intensively only on this idea of putting together Nick's songs and with the English song thing, but also with parts of the Requiem. That was my idea. And exactly how was a bit of a tricky thing, but anyway, I figured it out by putting the Requiem in it dramaturgically. Let's say the beginning of the CD begins with just kind of a very a song about life, existential road, it's called, and it's a short little song, and then comes the Requiem right away. And the Requiem comes again in the middle of the CD, and it comes at the end again as well. So,
yeah. Right, that was year 2012 when you released Requiem for a Pink Moon on Harmony Mundi. Now let's go back in time. You were born in 1959 in Minnesota. Then you had your musical education, Michigan, New York as well. And you've been singing in different ensembles. Let's go back to the times when you were singing with the Waverly Consort. What can you tell us about the Waverly Consort?
Well, the Waverly was my first big professional gig. For me, it was a big deal. Actually, one point or another, I had tried to make contact with them, but I didn't have the right in, and I don't even think I was, I wouldn't have made it through the front door, let's say. But then I was, I finished my master's degree out in Michigan in early music, actually, with a guy named Lyle Nordstrom, and studying voice with a guy named John Paul White, but I was working on both voice and lute there, but with my, let's say, more major was voice. Always I wanted to play the lute to accompany myself and to play as well as I possibly could, always. But then I had the chance to go on to Indiana University to do a doctorate, or I auditioned at another school as well called Case Western Reserve University, and at Case Western I met a soprano named Julian Baird, and Julian was a singer with the Waverly Consort for a while, and I remembered being in Washington D.C. for instance. I was studying sort of folk music, doing an internship at the Library of Congress right after my college. And I had seen posters of the Waverly Consort, and I thought to myself, "Oh my God, if I could get in a group like that, I would have made it. That would be it. And anyway, then, as I say, it took a few years, but I got an audition because Julian heard me auditioning for this college, and I played a lute song. I remember I played a Thomas Campion song called "Break Now My Heart and Die," and I played a couple of other things, I think some Dowland songs. And then she really liked me, and it also just happened that because there was only one bass in the Waverly Consort, there had to be an opening, and there was an opening. So she knew about it. I went to New York and I auditioned, and I got the job, and the rest is history, as they say. So.
And what led you from the Waverly Consort to the Boston Camerata?
Well, that's a good question. Yeah, the Boston Camerata director and the Waverly Consort director actually hated each other. I think I was I was pretty much the only one who ever sang with both groups at the same time, but that was short-lived because when I joined the Waverly, actually, it was kind of an amazing thing. It was the only group in the United States, and I don't think there's another one that exists like that now. Well, maybe Chanticleer, maybe there's a couple of other groups that are like vocal, full-time, but really early music groups, I don't know, maybe there's an orchestra somewhere. But anyway, we got benefits, full health benefits, which in the United States was exceptional at that time. And we had a full employment package, let's say, So I was one of 5 people in the group then that were employed, and that was really, really great. So anyway, but then after a few years of the Waverly and doing, I was young and, doing the same show again was something I thought for Christmas was something I wasn't that interested in. So I took a job instead with the Boston Camerata for a Christmas job, and then I was out of the group with the Waverly. So, but that was okay because with the Boston Camerata now, I made many, many, many CDs. I made a few CDs with the Waverly, also 3, and then I made, maybe I've made 10 CDs. I don't know with the Boston Camerata. I'd have to look back at my discography. But I made a lot of projects with them, and I even work with them now with the new director of the group, with Anna Sema. Joel Cohen retired from directing some years ago, and with Anna I still work from time to time, so that's great.
So when you look back, what did you learn with the Waverly Consort, and what did you learn with the Boston Camerata?
Well, with both of them I learned a kind of professionalism, that's for sure, because we had a lot of concerts and a lot of gigs, so sometimes, let's say, there's a certain kind of professionalism that just comes in when sometimes you feel good and you have a good day, but sometimes you have to sing anyway, because there's a concert at 8 o'clock, and that's the life of a professional musician. So I think I learned to be a professional. I also learned a lot about different kinds of repertoire, and I must admit that I even took some inspiration, I think, from the direction that I go now with my group, with my Ensemble Phoenix Munich. There are some groups, in fact, a lot of groups that get formed, let's say, maybe in college or whatever. There are 3, 4, 5 people. They get together and they say, we love to work together, and we want to form a group, and they form a group, and it's more or less a democracy, let's say, or they all maybe work on it. And and it's a very fixed group. In other words, if you order a group, one of my favorite groups, and some friends of mine, Singapore, it's called Singapore in Munich, or in Germany anyway, and they're a group, it's a vocal ensemble, and it's 6 people, I think, 5 or 6, and they're working all over Europe, but it's a group, and if you order the group, then you get those people unless somebody's sick or maybe some special circumstance. With my group, I do a lot of different kinds of things, which according to my interests. So in that way, it also influenced me. And there were some happy things that happened along the way. Actually, the Waverly Consort and the Boston Camerata got involved in early American music. And for me, I had already been studying. I studied a couple of years at the Library of Congress Archive of Folk Song. And I was interested in, let's say, our early music from a very beginning. And those groups helped me, and I learned more, and I was able to use also probably some things that I can just do well, like sing a ballad. So
then, after your time in the United States, one day, maybe out of the blue, I don't know, you decide to move to Europe, and you start, let's say, a new professional life in Europe. You've been playing with different orchestras, playing and singing with different orchestras and artists like Jordi Savall, for instance, and the Huelgas Ensemble, the Josquin Capella, so Musica Theater as well. These are ensembles you've been playing with. But then you create Ensemble Phoenix Munich, which is your band, so to say.
Right.
And you start creating your own CDs with this ensemble. Let's go CD by CD, okay, if you wish. The first one, as far as I know, to be released is Orpheus I Am. Is that right? This is in 2004.
Right.
So,
exactly.
What can you tell us about that CD, Orpheus I Am?
Well, Orpheus I Am, I decided I would use as kind of a visiting card, let's say it in a way. I decided not to concentrate on just one thing, one repertoire, like, for instance, just English song or something like that, or just Dowland or just Campion, or just, even more specifically. But I decided to use it as a CD that I would introduce myself with. And it became somehow even more than that. I mean, people still order it from me. I had, until very recently, still a few copies left. Now I have really none left. But I remember making it very well with a couple of young players, a guy named Sven Schwannberger, who's a multi-talent and very busy guy still, and also Domen Varincic from Ljubljana, a viola da gamba player. And those two guys joined me, and I did a lot of things. I did things also alone, just me with my lute, but I also had them play with me, and we recorded English, French, and also Italian music from this end of the Renaissance, let's say around 1580, to the beginning of the Baroque, more or less 1620 or something like that, maybe a few years before and a few years later sometimes. But that was the main focus of the repertoire that I did on that CD.
Right. As you know, we are transmitting live on Music Without Quarantine, and there are some people writing comments, and I'm going to read out some of them. For instance, we have Luciana Citardi from Argentina, I think Buenos Aires. She wrote, "Joel, the best forever. We are waiting for you in Latin America."
Oh, great.
When are you going to Latin America?
Well, the only country in Latin America I've been to is Colombia, actually, but once I did a concert there with the French ensemble, actually, the ensemble Gilles Benchois. They have a very strong relationship with Colombia and with South America through their cultural institutions, the Alliance Française, and so the French get to South America quite a lot because they the Alliance Française, well, pays for it and helps them to go, you know, for instance. I hope I get there soon. Luciana and a few other people are working on it. She's in Argentina, and we hope to get to Chile and Uruguay and, you know, and everywhere else, you know. Unfortunately, right at the moment, this stupid thing called Corona is standing in the way of like everything, all of our best laid plans. So we'll see when we get to do all these great things.
And I'd like to remind all of you who are watching right now live, if you like, you can write your questions, and I'll ask those questions. If you write them in the comment area, I will read them out. So feel free to ask if you have any questions. Let's go on with your series. We were in 2004 with the Orpheus AM. Then in 2007, you released a CD that for me is fantastic, which is the Elfin Night. The first on Harmonia Mundi, I think. Is that right? And well, I have that CD, and it's absolutely amazing. I strongly recommend. If there are two CDs I strongly recommend from you, one of them is this one, The Elfin Night, and of course, Working for a Pink Moon.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Well, you know, I remember very well and very making the Elfin Night CD was a huge thing for me. It was in the end a huge break, you know, but I decided for that CD that I would take some risks, and at the moment I did it, actually there were huge risks involved in making that CD. There were artistic risks, I thought, because I based the Elfin Night comes from the title of this ballad number 100 in the Child Ballads. Francis Childs was a folk song collector from Boston, and he made just volumes and volumes and volumes of folk songs, and he classified them and put them together and found different variants of a song and traced it back to its beginning, or tried to, you know. And he traced back a song that kind of everybody knows, knew anyway, in a version by Simon and Garfunkel, you know, the Scarborough Fair. There was this version that was very popular, and still I think people hear it from time to time. And I found another variant in a song called Songs of Olden Times by a guy named William Chappell. He was collecting folk songs, and he brought and also a lot of early music, and he in popular songs of olden times, I think was the exact title of the book. And he you know, they kept on adding on to that, and so I think in the third appendix or something like that, there was a new tune for Scarborough Fair, sung by some street musician, and just the tune was there. And so I took the tune and I made my own version of it a long time ago, actually, and put my own bass line to it and made a version that I accompanied myself with. And so I had this song that I did, and I would often do it as an encore, and people liked it a lot. And so, but you know, I thought of it as kind of, you know, not so serious, you know, because. And in early music and things like this, people are serious, you know. I mean, people like study things, and they become very serious and very particular about the instruments that they use, and rightly so. I mean, frankly, if I'm honest, I don't go if there's a very good guitarist maybe, but playing John Dowland songs, I don't go either, you know, because I love it on the lute. I played the guitar myself. I played those songs on the guitar myself, but now I play the lute, and I know that that's the instrument that makes that, you know, come alive, that music. So I mean, in a way, maybe I'm also sometimes an early music snob, let's say, or, you know, but anyway, so I took that piece as kind of, let's say, the starting point for the Elfin Night CD. And then I found variants on that. Whittingham Fair is a variant on it from Northumbria in England, not down in Italy. And then there was another version I found. Well, I found it in a book. You know, I found it but from Appalachia, and it's called The Lover's Tasks. And so those three things were kind of the pillars of the CD, you know, or the basic structure of the CD became Whittingham Fair, True Lover's Farewell, and then also the last version of Scarborough Fair, let's say, or the Elfin Night, which is the real title that Child gave to all of these ballads that go back to a Scottish ballad in 1620s. Okay, that's how also I made the connection back to my, let's say, my repertoire by tracing the ballad back to at least the earliest version in Scotland around 1620. Of course, it was the first one recorded. That means the ballads are by nature transmitted orally, and someday a guy named Francis Childs or John Lomax or somebody else in Hungary, Bela Bartok, I don't know, you know, writes down then the tune, the folk song, but otherwise they're transmitted orally. Anyway, that's a long way of saying it. Now that's the personal part, and I found a lot of other ballads, did a lot of research and arrangements too. I mean, I wrote a lot of music there, not the tunes mostly. I wrote the accompaniments and made the arrangements. So that came, but you know, at that moment, it was a really tough moment. It was, you know, I didn't really have the resources, the money, to hire the engineer that I wanted, but I hired him anyway, and he agreed to do it, kind of on a risk basis, you know. And he had worked for Harmonia Mundi, and also for ECM, and that was my other kind of, those were my two like dream labels, let's say. You know, I really liked them both a lot, what they did. So I made the CD first at my own risk, and then one day Eva Kutas, the head of Harmonia Mundi, came to Munich, and she was working on a recording in back of the scenes, just listening, but you know, to Philippe Herreweghe, the famous conductor well, Belgian conductor, but mostly in France. But he's they were working together in the Hercules Saal, it's called, in Munich, and my engineer played, or my guy played some of the CD that we'd recorded for Eva, and immediately Eva liked it, and she called me, and I met her for a coffee, and then a couple of weeks later, she called me back and said they would definitely take the CD. So that was a big moment for me professionally.
We have one question coming from Risa Pullman, but I will leave it for a bit later, because we'll go back to Requiem for a Sick Moon, and it's related to that CD. I will ask that question later on, but let's go on. Year 2008, it becomes a bit Italian for you. O felice morire.
Yeah.
Oh, happy death.
Yeah, happy death. Yeah. Yeah. Well, this was another love for me, and I wanted, in addition, let's say, to you know, another part of me is doing these kind of crazy bass songs with big range and with coloratura in them, and let's say not just that though, also a lot of poetry in them. The thing that is definitely a thread through all my work, as it is to some extent with any singer, are the words, the poetry, and you know, the monadists, they were called, the guys like Giulio Caccini. They wanted to recreate a style where they basically were declaiming poetry to the sound of their own accompaniment, to their own instrument. And so I took up the arch lute, which is an instrument with two necks, and you know, and you've seen it in some of my music quarantine videos, and that is a fantastic instrument. A little bit like a lute with a harp, because the bass notes are diatonic, that means they're stepwise tuned, and the rest of the instrument's tuned like a lute. And so it's a fantastic combination instrument. They were trying to recreate something like, let's say, Apollo with his lute, you know, with his lyre, I mean, you know, and a sort of Greek theatrical idea that you could move someone so deeply to their soul, move the affections, is what they would say in the Baroque terminology, using rhetoric, using declamation. And so this use of poetry, or this way of singing poetry, appealed to me as well. Not just the virtuosic part, but it is also interesting how some of the runs go, 2.5 octaves in one kind of a melisma or run. And there's a lot of low notes, but there's also some high notes, and it's interesting repertoire.
Right. Now, 2011, you released Rose of Sharon. What can you tell us about Rose of Sharon?
Yeah, Rose of Sharon is American music, and this goes back to my interest that I really had for a long time in our early music, let's say. And when you do early American then stuff, you try to go back and use the same principles that you would use when you are studying medieval music or Renaissance music or whatever. You try to find out what instruments did they use exactly. What we ended up we actually my gamba player found a cello, a Yankee church bass built around 1800 in Boston that we used for the recording, and that gave us it gives you a feeling also as a group of authenticity and of going back and getting the original sounds. I used a guitar that was built around 1900, but we would call a romantic guitar now, smaller than our normal classical guitars and the Spanish guitar. It's really quite a small instrument, but with a very, very sweet sound, I also went back to guys, our first, we would say, American choral composer, William Billings. William Billings was born in Boston and raised in Boston and composed and lived in Boston. That's me. He was really homegrown guy, So, and he brought out 4 books of music between about 1770 and 1800. And in his book, for instance, The Singing Master's Assistant, he talks about certain principles of sound. For instance, he talks about a principle that comes in other books too, but that the bass is like a pyramid in a choir, he says. The bass and the low should be strong and form the basis, the foundation, and be strong. And the higher you go, also individually in your own voice, but the higher you go, the kind of softer it can be. That makes this kind of pyramid of sound, and it works acoustically too, Just recently, just in December, I was working with a famous conductor, Andrew Parrot, who has the Taverner Consort in England, and we were working with the Netherlands Bach Vereinigung, the Bach Society in Holland, doing Monteverdi, but we talked about the same principle, this principle of strong fundament and then getting softer on the top. But anyway, so there were various things I tried to bring in to the music, and it's very interesting, the early music in America anyway. Sometimes sounds very archaic, a lot of times written in 3 voices. Much of the music is written in shape notes, or there is a tradition of shape notes, which was a way of teaching sight singing, where each note is a different shape, or at least do, re, mi, fa. At least there's 4 shapes sometimes. They repeat anyway. There's different systems. But and the melody's in the tenor voice, which is unusual. We say tenorlied, tenor song, and we think about Renaissance music mostly. But this melodies are in the tenor voice mostly. Really very interesting stuff. So.
And then in 2012 is the year of Requiem for a Pink Moon, and I take the chance to ask you a question. Teresa Pullman said, how did you know of Nick Drake? Was he at the time famous in the United States? Weren't you not too young when Nick was singing, performing to know him?
Yeah, I was on this earth already, in 1974. I was around, but I didn't know his music, and I was just finished with college. And actually, when I first heard Nick Drake, and I met a guy, a guitar player, and who was also writing his own songs. But I went and I actually, with my guitar, I performed a talent show, we would call it, in Minnesota, in Mankato, Minnesota, a small town, but with a university. And I went to the university and there was a competition. And I performed in this competition and I won. And the prize was that I got to do a concert, you know, which I probably played for free. I don't even know, but I won. You know, that was my prize. So but anyway, so this guy was at the concert that I played at Mankato, and he came up to me. He was really kind of a cool guy. He was really kind of different. I don't know, something about him. And he said, he asked me if I knew about Nick Drake, and I said no. And so he played me the first recordings of Nick Drake that I ever heard, and I was pretty much right away really blown away, because Nick's guitar playing was so clear, so exact, you know, so orchestral somehow also, you know, in the way he played, in the voicings and of the tunings that he used and things that I was really impressed, and I liked the songs. I learned immediately, like Time Has Told Me, from the very first recording of Nick's, which was 5 Leaves Left. I learned that piece. And then I learned some other pieces of Pink Moon. And then, you know, I played those songs for some years, but after a while, like I said, I just, I got involved in the lute and in early music, and I just left that stuff mostly. So.
I have to confess that I didn't know about Nick Drake until I listened to your CD. So for me, it was a discovery as well. Never heard of him until I listened to...
Yeah, it's both ways, I think. You know, some people who knew about Nick Drake that have listened to the CD, and some people who didn't know about Nick Drake now know about Nick, you know, probably through the CD. Yeah.
I can see some of the people who are connected. I can see that it's one of them is Manuel Millán. You don't know him, but he's a guitar player as well. He's a guitarist, Spanish guitarist, and also a music critic from Cuenca. I don't know if you ever heard of the Semana Religiosa de Cuenca, which is the sacred or religious music week in Cuenca. It's a festival, a very prestigious festival.
Yo canté 2 o 3 veces allá. Así.
Great. Let's move on to year 2013. In year 2013, you collaborate with Sabine Lutzenberger and Bernd Oliver Fröhlich to play and sing music by a composer that I love from the Middle Ages, or Renaissance, early Renaissance, the German one, Oswald von Wolkenstein. What can you tell us about this?
Yeah, well, Wolkenstein, that was the idea for the CD was actually came from Sabine, who is involved much more than I have been in medieval music, and that she's really made a name for her recordings of Hildegard von Bingen and other people, a great singer of medieval music especially, but she's also very versatile. But then we had this friendship, Bernd and I and Sabine, and the idea from the outset of that CD was not to do Wolkenstein in any traditional way, but to take our inspiration, let's say, from Wolkenstein's persona or his life, rather than very interesting life. I knew, actually, as a side, I with the Waverly Consort, so to take it back, the early 90s when I joined them, my first really big solo in a really big space in Town Hall in Munich, which seats over 2,000 people, you know, I had a big solo singing anyway. There was a group of instruments playing with me, but I sang this autobiographical piece of Oswald von Wolkenstein called Es fügt sich, and Es fügt sich has I don't know, approximately 1 million strophes, I think, you know, and it really documents Wolkenstein's whole life. And there was a translation by a guy named Snodgrass, an English poet, who or an American, who he translated anyway into English the story. And so I sang this piece and I loved it. I thought, what an interesting life, what a crazy guy, you know. He talks about learning and knowing 10 languages. He meets the Queen of Aragon, you know, he's friends with Sigismund, you know, he's an amazing guy. So anyway, so I knew about him, but I really was no expert in Wolkenstein, let's say. But Wolkenstein took pieces by like Landini, for instance, yeah, and he would take a piece by these earlier composers. And of course, that in that time, kind of music was sometimes written down, sometimes more or less written down, you know, but the idea of signing your work and getting royalties and all that wasn't really there. So with Landini, for instance, he just took the piece, changed it a little bit, maybe if he needed to, but otherwise put his own words to it and adapted it and changed it to his uses, you know, let's say. And so we did the same thing, but then we took also ourselves, let's say, you know, Sabine played sometimes the bells, recorder, singing. Bernd plays the saxophone. In fact, Bernd's first instrument was the saxophone, and he's an amazingly talented saxophone player and jazz musician. So he improvised and gave us a lot of impulses. So we ended up improvising and finding our way on the CD. Every performance is also a unique experience. So.
I agree. And Manuel Millán, the one I've told you before, he's got a question for you. Would you like to sing 19th century lead and songs with romantic guitar?
Yeah, I mean, I have done it a bit, you know, and it's fantastic. I love it. In fact, I did a program with Emma Kirkby, which I called Masters of Song, and we did it in my series, and we did it a little bit. We did it in a few other places. We did it also in Ghent. We did it, you know, in Germany in a couple of festivals. But with Emma, we began the program actually with John Dowland songs, and we did it with lute, with a really very, well, an excellent lute player, world-class, Michał Gątko, from Poland, but he studied in Basel. And Michał accompanied us with Domen Marincic, my gamba player, so we were 4 people. In fact, you see some of the videos in YouTube of Flow My Tears and Come Again we put there. Anyway, the first half was just pure Dowland, and then the second half was pure Schubert. And so we did the Schubert songs with guitar and also with cello, which was really fun. And it made the guitar player's life a lot easier on songs like Erlkönig, you know, which is the Schubert song, you know, because it has a very fast-moving bass. And meanwhile, there's this really nervous accompaniment, you know. So it worked really well, and I love it with guitar. I have sung the Winterreise quite a lot, but with piano, which is also nice, but guitar is great. Yeah, and since we know these guys, especially Schubert, for instance, we know he played the guitar, so I think it's a very valid approach.
Right. Now, in 2016, you came back to the Ensemble Phoenix Munich, and you released Tell Me True Love. Why did you need to ask, Tell Me True Love?
Well, Tell Me True Love is one of the great Dowland songs. It's one of his later songs, and it's one of the most Italian-influenced songs, because Italy just basically took over the world, you know, musically at a certain point. Everybody, well, the French have, you know, always put their stamp and made it different, you know, but and well, everybody did, but that's the fascinating thing. Also, how every country adapted it. Of course, that's also interesting. But with this song, for instance, "Tell Me True Love," which is a song to Elizabeth I, of course, not the same, it's just this gorgeous love song to her, really, you know, and as I say, in this kind of very flexible Italian kind of sound. And you hear in that song, the way I recorded it also, you hear something that was my main idea in doing that CD. I mean, I've done Dowland songs before, so why do a Dowland CD? Well, one reason was to really show just Dowland, just really focus on just his work for me also. Huh? I mean, I like to do these things that then, you know, where I really look at every song, you know, and think about it. But also what I wanted to do, and I did with this song, was this CD, was I brought together a consort of viols, and it was my dream to sing with 4 viola da gambas, you know, and to have this kind of, let's say, sometimes it's like a bed of sound, you know, like they kind of hold me somehow, but also it's a constant interplay because Dowland is contrapuntal music, you know. So hearing the counterpoint then with these gambas, I also, well, there were a couple of reasons. One thing I also thought is, since I was transposing it down with the lute, you know, I want the lines to be very, very, very clear, you know. And so when you have a gamba, one on each line, then every line is there and is clear. So it was a wonderful experience, and I had I must say, you can't always plan this. You can't actually. You can try to plan it, but usually if you try to plan it, it doesn't work. Which is something that there was a chemistry. The players ended up just really liking each other too, you know, and enjoying playing with each other and interacting with each other so well, which is the whole idea too. You know, they're singing, let's say, their own line with their instrument, you know, so it became a real ensemble thing. I mean, I'm the only singer, but that doesn't mean that I'm the only one singing.
Yeah.
They're singing their instrument. Yeah.
Then a year later, in 2017, you come back to the German songs. You released a CD with ensemble Personat, again with Sabine Lutzenberger and with Marc Lewon, among others. And this CD is called Bis an der Welt ihr Ende. So, what can you tell us about it?
Well, that was like this Martin Luther, starting the Martin Luther year, and about composers in that time, you know. So this CD, I was, you know, let's say one of the ensemble also, you know. Sabine it's her group, as you say, Personat, you know. So I was along, let's say. I wouldn't say it, how should I say it in a nice way, along for the ride, not exactly, but I sang these strophic pieces and these wonderful pieces with Sabine and with these great musicians, Marc Lewon, Baptiste Romain, who are 2 of the best early music musicians in the world for medieval music, for sure. But anyway, in general, fantastic people. So that whole experience was great, as it is with any of the CDs with Sabine, you know. And in fact, I think now I'd have to look back almost, you know, coming out each year also since, let's say, Orpheus I.M. I mean, there must be also 10 other CDs that have, you know, come out at least with Josquin Capella, with other groups, you know, where I'm along to sing the bass, let's say, or with the Huelgas Ensemble, or with other groups. But always, what's nice for me is to have those experiences, also to work with those different directors, to get their idea of the music, you know, to work with the different musicians, because in groups like with Huelgas Ensemble, for instance, they're just the best musicians for polyphonic music in the world are in that group, you know, some of them. and it's a fantastic sound what Paul van Nevel gets with that ensemble. So, but anyway, so that's yeah.
Teresa Pullman has written another comment, and she said, for after, this is so interesting. Joel crosses so my favorite styles, Renaissance, folk, Hildegard, and he sang with so many people and ensembles who I know from names so well. But I must admit, without music, without quarantine, I would not have known him. Seems stupid now, so Joel is my discovery of 2020. That's what she said.
Well, that's very sweet. Thank you very much. Thank you.
You have the last CD, at least known to me, Un niño nos es nacido, a child for us is born, and this is your last so far as far as I know.
Yeah. Well, as with the ensemble, it is. Yeah, I released a couple of CDs with the Boston Camerata that came out recently. Free America was one, and there's another one too. One with boxes. What's it called again? I'll think of it. But I think those are the only other two that have come out just really recently. But yeah, no, with my group, you got it. That's it. Yeah, Un niño nos es nacido. That was a project of music from Spain and from, so let's say, the old world and then the new world. And this is not the first time that a CD like this has been made, but I think we have some pieces on there, for instance, from Jose Cascantes from Bogota, who was the chapel master of the chapel and conductor and composer in Bogota. I think that's the first time maybe that this Oiga Niño, for instance, is the first time that maybe that was on a major label. I don't want to be wrong. I know it's been recorded before, but of course never as good as we did it. But I loved. I heard this piece La Trulla, for instance, also. That's a really fascinating piece. It's a 20-minute piece. It's incredible. It's 10 Christmas carols of villancicos strung together with different little interludes and plays. And then I did, as I often do, first you start with a CD like that with what you know, and I had done O Magnum Mysterium from Tomás Luis de Victoria. I had done that piece when I was a kid, and it was one of the first choral pieces that I sang with my choir, I remember, and I was just blown away. I loved it, and so that was, I don't know. I mean, my voice had changed, so I suppose I was maybe 16.
Now, one of the sections I have in this virtual copy with is about books. What kind of books or a book that you are reading now, you've read, that you would recommend people to read?
Well, I just finished a book that you mean like just about anything, just a novel or
yeah,
what?
just about anything, not particularly music.
Well, recently I've been, because I sometimes do it with authors, I try, if I like somebody, I read several books, or I try to, and I read last year a book of short stories, Men Without Women, and it was by Haruki Murakami, and I have kind of a relationship with Japan. I lived there for a year between Kyoto and Osaka when I was a foreign student, when I was a young guy, and since then I have kind of this feeling of let's say some kind of special relationship with Japan. But anyway, I really enjoyed. I loved those short stories. I really got into it. And then I read another book of his called Commendatore, and that took a while. I chose it because I figured it had something to do with Don Giovanni and Mozart and everything, and a killing Commendatore it was called. And I must admit I didn't like it as well. But then I was reading some reviews about other people, and I thought, well, I have to give them a third chance, because I really liked the first book so well. And then I just finished The Colorless Tsukuru Tatsaki, The Colorless something Tsukuru Tatsaki. And it's also Murakami. And I must admit, I really liked that book. And the more I thought about it, and the more I think about it, because it kind of stays with me, some of the stories and the way that he tells the story kind of has stayed with me. So he was the most recent one. Before that now that's been a few years, my Gabriel García Marquez, kick. But otherwise, I read also, some of my literature about music, Right at the moment, I'm studying up for some programs next year. I'm thinking of doing a Walter von der Vogelweide program, and also a program around women composers in my series, which will be next year. I'm trying to decide on who to focus on, those kind of things.
And the same we did with books. I usually do this with CDs. We've been speaking about your CDs, but if you would have to, I know it's difficult, it's hard, sometimes it's not easy, but if you had to recommend a CD or an album or a recording, a work that you say, okay, this is something you've got to listen once in a lifetime, what would you recommend?
Wow, yeah. Well, I probably would say something like Beethoven sonatas played by, certain Arthur Brendel or whatever. I should say something, very elite. And there are programs and CDs and things that made a big impact on me, but I'm pretty eclectic as far as the pop world, or as far as the kind of thing I would listen to when I'm running around and maybe not just sitting down and listening. I was thinking the other day, what a great recording Van Morrison made, with Moondance. That was like that was like one of my favorite recordings, and still is somehow of all time. But I've also been a big Dylan fan, and recently I listened to his song. He wrote a 17-minute song in 2020. I don't know if you've all listened to it or not.
No.
Murder Most Foul, he calls it, and I listened to it at least 3 times. And the 16 minutes go by because Dylan is so clever with how he brings themes and things together, and so ironic also with the way that he turns a phrase or changes a melody or these kinds of things. But other than that, there's been a lot of recordings that are, let's say, more, the early recordings that the guy that got me into early music was a long time ago was Julian Bream and Peter Pears singing down, from a long time ago. So now it's a little hard to listen to because we don't, it's not the same.
and now my last question, because we've been over an hour now. I could be speaking with you for hours. It's very interesting, but we have to cut somewhere. And one of the sections of this coffee with is if someone from the future in 50 years time, 100 years time, would watch this video and watch you, what message would you have for those, or for that person ahead in the future who's listening to us? We poor people from the beginning of the 21st century.
Yeah. Well, I would hope that in 100 years' time that we've progressed a little bit. I would hope that we maybe are not having protests about races and racism around the world. Right now, in my home city, Minneapolis, Minnesota, that's where I grew up. That was the epicenter of this recent racial, let's say, the uprising, but also where, of course, George Floyd was murdered. And so, I hope that we come a lot farther. I hope so. In my friends, in 100 years' time, I hope they all listen to my CDs, and that they're also a little bit farther.
Great. So, Joel, as usual, it's been a pleasure talking to you. I really thank you. I know in some time we will have another coffee, because there are so many things I could be talking to you. So we will talk once again in some time. And thank you. It was a pleasure to have this coffee with you.
Thanks for the invitation.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks.